celebration of the completion of the conservation project at the Carrite Cemetery at Basatine. Before I just give a few thank yous, since some of you are likely new to the American Research Center, new to our center, I thought I'd just take a moment to introduce you to our organization. The mission of our organization is to support research on all aspects of Egyptian history and culture, to protect, preserve, and promote Egyptian cultural heritage, and to strengthen American-Egyptian cultural collaborations. ARCE was founded with the vision of establishing a world-class research center to bring together Egyptian and American scholars. And now, for almost 75 years, we've worked to protect and conserve Egyptian sites and monuments, of which you're going to hear about tonight. To date, in partnership with the Egyptian government, along with the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, and numerous international organizations, including the Drop of Milk Association, ARCE has completed more than 95 conservation projects, funded more than 700 research scholarly fellows, and awarded more than $9 million in grants through our Antiquities Endowment Fund to support the work of documenting and preserving Egypt's cultural heritage. In Egypt, we work closely with the Egyptian government, educational institutions, and community to create sustainable heritage projects that invest in the local community while preserving and protecting historic sites. In the United States, we deliver a vast variety of educational opportunities, including lectures, and our annual meeting to encourage the exploration of Egypt's long and rich history. And we are a membership organization with thousands of members around the globe, comprising of Egyptologists, archaeologists, Middle East historians, and many non-expert enthusiasts who just simply find the history of Egypt fascinating. And if you're not a member, I do encourage you to become one, and we have membership brochures in the back. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to our speakers, but before that, I just want to start with a few thank yous. Of course, I want to start again with Magda Haroun and Sandy Ibrahim for their partnership in this project, and of course, the Drop of Milk Association, without which this would not have been possible. And special thanks, of course, are also due to Ambassador Daniel Rubenstein, Lauren Lovelace, Julia Fendrick, and of course the rest of the team at the U.S. Embassy, and we thank you for your partnership and support. And with that support, in 2019, ARCE was awarded the Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation grant to conduct the management and conservation plan for the historic cemetery of Basatine. And this funding, of course, prompted the work to begin this project, and then led us to David and Mary Ellen, and the partnership that we continued with creating the Garden of Remembrance. And I'm quoting Mary Ellen again, that your dedication has truly given life to the stones. We're honored to have you all here tonight. So with that, I will introduce you to Dr. Nicholas Warner, who's ARCE's Director of Cultural Heritage Projects. He's an architect, architectural historian trained at Cambridge University and the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University. He's lived in Egypt since 1993. He has participated in and directed numerous projects related to the documentation, preservation, and presentation of heritage sites from all periods. Among these sites, the numerous sites that he's worked at include the Qusair Fort Visitor Center, the Saqqara New Kingdom Necropolis Project, the tombs of Anen and Mena in Luxor, the North Harba Oasis Survey, New York University's excavations at Al-Haida in the Dakhla Oasis, and Nicholas's favorite, the Red and White Monasteries in Sohag. I'm saying. And he has numerous projects also in Cairo, including the Cairo Mapping Project, open-air museums in Montserrat, the restoration of the Geir Anderson Museum, and of course his current work with ARCE has included this project, which you're now going to hear about, along with projects at Khonsu Temple in Luxor, and the Shrine of Iqwat Yusuf, and Howard Carter's house in Luxor. So with that, Dr. Nicholas, take it away.
you very much, Louise, and welcome to everybody this evening. I know some of you have come a very long way, so I congratulate you on arriving here in one piece. So I realise that the date at the top of this slide is wrong, and that we started this project actually in 2019, not 2020, just at the beginning of COVID. So it was not an auspicious time to start a project, but we worked through it, I'm glad to say, and we're grateful for the support we received from the embassy throughout. It started off as being a conservation, as being a documentation project rather than a conservation project. That was the main focus of the project, was to try and record some of the cultural heritage that was represented by the cemeteries in Basatine. But later on, with the support of the Carried Kids of America, and David and Mary Helen and others, we extended the project to include the actual installation of a garden of remembrance in a section of the cemetery that had been conserved during the course of the ARCE project, which has changed everything, I think. I'm going to have a small preamble here, which may be slightly irreverent, but I'm going to start with the anarchic film that was made in the 1970s called The Life of Brian. And in this film, there was a moment when a group of dissident Jewish protesters, I suppose, or people who were anxious to throw off the yoke of their Roman oppressors in Jerusalem, gathered in secret and asked the question, what have the Romans ever done for us? And perhaps unsurprisingly, the answer came back, well, the bridges, the roads, the sewers, the water supply, bathhouses, and the list went on and on and on. So I'd rather like to turn this question on its head this evening and ask the question, pertinent to the Egyptian situation, what have the Jews ever done for us? And I would say, if I had to say anything encapsulated in a word, it would be culture. That's what they've done for us here. And I would start off with this picture, which shows, of course, Solomon Schechter in the Cambridge University Library, my university library, going through this vast pile of documents, the Geniza hoard from the Ben Ezra synagogue, and I can well understand why he's holding his head, because he's got this vast task of not only deciphering the documents that were found, but also conserving them and publishing them one day. So it was a vast task, which only really came to completion, if it can be said to have come to completion, many, many years later. Here's just a picture showing Ben Ezra Synagogue. I know that it's currently shut for conservation work by the Ministry of Antiquities, but this is obviously where this vast hoard of material, which was of unparalleled importance for our knowledge of the medieval Islamic world, and the world of the Jews, that were a very important part of that. It demonstrated, I think, conclusively that Jewish culture was integrated extremely well with the rest of Arabic culture here in Egypt, and it's received its sort of testament, as it were, in Solomon Boytain's multi-volume publication, which is, I won't say it's essential bedtime reading, but it's fascinating stuff. It really is extraordinary. Trawling through this corpus of material with the help of an amazing index is really rewarding, and sheds light on the extraordinary international aspect of the Jewish diaspora based in Fustat, in Cairo, who were communicating with traders all the way around the world. So it's called the Mediterranean Society, but actually the boundaries of Jewish influence and trade went far further than that, to India, as we know, and other countries even further east. We tend to think of ourselves as being uniquely connected in the modern world through the internet and other things, but when you read this, you see just how integrated that community was across the globe, and that's a really remarkable thing to take away from these documents. If we fast forward 1,000 years, a blip in time in Egyptian history, just 1,000 years, we come to Cairo in the early 20th century, and the extraordinary architectural legacy that was left by the Jewish community here, which encompassed not only synagogues but also the obvious one here being Adi Street Synagogue, and department stores, residential buildings. It's an extraordinary legacy that we have that was left to us by the wealthy elite of Jewish Cairo. And the same can be said also for Alexandria. We should confine ourselves, strictly speaking, to just Cairo. So that is a legacy that I, for one, am quite happy to help in any way that I can to preserve, because it is of profound importance, I think, to the history of this country and the culture of this country. And I think that there have been obviously reasons why this legacy has been abandoned because of the loss of community here, but it's still there, and it still deserves our respect and our attention, and an attempt to integrate it into the contemporary culture of Cairo, for example. It's not just buildings, of course, that I'm talking about in terms of the legacy, and I suspect that David, who will follow me, will probably pick up on this theme, but I'd like to single out one particular individual, which was Daoud Hosni, who was a Karaite Jew in Cairo. He was a friend of Tal Harb, and he was also the composer of lyrics and music, amongst others for a very famous diva, Kulthum, and Laila Murad, and others. So he was somebody who contributed a lot to the Egyptian musical scene in the 20s and early 30s. So having done with that preamble, I'll come to the subject of tonight's talk, which is really the Basatine cemeteries, and I'll use the plural there. It was one cemetery, but now I think we have to treat it as a collection of dots rather than a single whole. This is a detail of the foundation of the Ottoman court document that is in the possession of the drop of milk, that is a confirmation of the right of Jews to bury their dead in the area of Basatine. And confirmation, as I say, this document is 17th century, mid-17th century, but it's a confirmation of an earlier court order from the time of Qaitbay, at the end of the Mamluk period, the end of the 15th century, and that in itself was probably the confirmation of yet earlier documents. And tradition has it that the dating of this cemetery goes back to the time of Ahmad ibn Tulun, so the 9th century ruler of Egypt. In fact, if you take a wrong turn, as I did the other day going to the Basatine cemetery, you do find yourself faced with a relic of Ahmad ibn Tulun in the form of an aqueduct that passed quite close by to the area of Basatine, which is a mud brick structure that ran from a pumping station next to a lake just close to the Karaite cemetery today, all the way to his great mosque in Al-Qatai, at the edge of Cairo, a distance of maybe 5 or 6 kilometers or more, actually. This shows the whole document with a string of witnesses. Of course, you can't have a good legal document without lots of witnesses, so they're all there. And we have translated, as part of this project, we did translate this document. The translator said, "Will it ever be used in a court of law, my translation?" So I hope that that is the case. So the cemetery itself, at the beginning of the 20th century, occupied more or less that area that you see within the white rectangle. So a very, very large area. It was on the edge of the biggest Muslim cemetery, just to the south of the biggest Muslim cemetery of Cairo. And you can see a little corner of that in the top left of the Muslim cemetery. The Baha'is are also buried here. There's a small Baha'i cemetery. But by far the largest and most significant burial ground in this particular part of the town is the Basatine, or was the Basatine cemetery. Just to show you from the air, that's the area that we're talking about. It was bisected by the Cairo Ring Road, construction of which I think dates to the early 80s, if I remember. And that road has recently been widened. It passes directly over parts of the main Basatine cemetery, which you can see here, the large area of red. And then you can see pockets. I've only indicated 2 here. One is the family compound of the Mosseri family, a very well-known and important family in Egyptian history in the 19th and 20th centuries. And then the Lisha Menashe graveyards which are at the top there, where I just said Karaite. And the Karaite had an equivalent area to the Rabbinite Jews in terms of their sort of footprint on the ground. But this today, what those of you who came to see this morning, is the only surviving section of the formerly much larger Karaite cemetery. And for that reason alone, I'm very glad to have been able to help and participate in the process of conserving it. It's the last evidence, as it were, on the ground for this community, apart from the two synagogues that were also in Old Cairo and in Al-Sayed. So for the large cemetery, Sami Ibrahim has been doing fantastic work there over many years now. I don't know where he finds the energy to do this, but it's an extraordinary, an act of piety and also an act of extraordinary determination. Most of the tombs that you see here were relatively simple, blocks of stone, missing their marble slabs, which were all robbed out from the 1970s, I think, onwards. So these, of course, had the identifiers of who was actually buried there. So that poses an enormous problem, which Sami is coming to terms with now, I think, and finding names that go alongside these graves. The architecture is also quite complex in many examples. You see recreations of pharaonic architecture, little Egyptian temples, miniature temples. We have an obelisk, at least one, that's inscribed in Hebrew, which is quite an interesting find amongst the foliage there. And this is a big project that I think will take some years to see through to its conclusion in terms of site management. We did some work here, but it was on the documentation side. Just to give you an example, also the architecture, this is one of the Mosseri family tombs, and it has a kind of interesting neo-fascist Italianate feel to it. And some of the architecture of these cemeteries is extremely interesting, hybrid architecture. This is slightly different because this is the tomb of Haim Kaputzi, who was a well-known rabbi. So he was a spiritual leader rather than a pillar of the Jewish community per se, and is an interesting site. It's a rather densely crowded area now. As you see here, this is the Katawi family mausoleum, and you can see the way in which the informal developments have sprung up around this particular domed mausoleum, which is very difficult to find unless you have a guide like Sami to help you get there. It's a kind of, this one is a neo-Fatimid sort of extravaganza. It's quite extraordinary that these things do survive at all, but they are there and they deserve, to be preserved and visited, in fact. So our work with the documentation started in the main Basatine cemetery. It went on to Haim Kaputzi as well, to map the more than 85 graves that surround the shrine and the grave of Haim Kaputzi himself. And I think these people wanted to be buried there because of the baraka of Haim Kaputzi himself. And so this is another potential target area for intervention one day. And now I come to the Menashe and Elisha graveyards, which many of us have visited this morning, and their architectural form is very similar. They both have these raised corner rooms, and which I think were used not only for praying, but also for visitation of the dead on Fridays, maybe, or Saturdays. I'm not so sure which day. Somebody can tell me, probably. And the whole idea of yes.
Most of the time on Sunday.
Sundays. Things usually happen on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday here. You don't always have a fixed time. So people would visit the cemeteries on one day a week, certainly, and pay their respects to the dead. In the Muslim tradition, you would always take a meal there and have a picnic, more or less, with your dead relatives. which may be a carryover from Pharaonic tradition. Of course, so that's another subject. So, not so many burials in the cemeteries, because they were relatively recently established, these two graveyards, 1930s. But obviously, they were the focus of a much larger community. And this picture, I think, is an important one because it shows, it shows that community visiting a now destroyed companion graveyard to the ones of the Menashe and Elisha families. So when it came to the conservation of the site, we had a few problems to deal with. I mean, we selected this site not only because it was a unique survival, but also because it was relatively easy to access, because some of the other areas of the cemeteries are extremely difficult to access. And I could see that it had potential in terms of its visitation, its future visitation. So this shows you the condition of the Menashe part. Before we started work, much of the metalwork had been stolen, marble had been stolen in many places. There were squatter developments that had taken place in both courtyards, and nobody was actually living there, but this is the evidence of random squatter invasion. And we had structural problems. The dome had structural problems which had to be addressed. Missing stonework in many areas, so that also had to be fixed. And we also had fine conservation to deal with, particularly as regards the inscriptions, which are a very important part of this complex. Not only the inscriptions on the tombs themselves, the graves themselves, but also on the building, on the buildings, because they tell a different story. Not all of the inscriptions have survived, but those that have are interesting and important. So here that shows the condition of that corner room. We took the ceiling back to its original lath structure and replastered it. Elements which were missing were replicated according to either sole surviving examples, of the balustrades we had examples, or from photographs. So we used those archival images as a means to recreate the missing architecture, the destroyed architecture of the complex. That shows you what it was like at the end of the first phase, I would say, of conservation. And inside the prayer room of the Menashe, the gate of the Menashe. The other side, the Elisha side, looked like that. Again, more squatter occupation, damage to the gravestones, displacement, ruptures that need to be fixed. So this just shows some of the team putting on, and I should say that we were very lucky to have a good team of conservators, Egyptian conservators, who carried out all of this work. And Heather Sharkey is here tonight, I think, was a participant in that process. And that shows again the end of the conservation project. So this was more or less the point at which, the last thing I should say is that we did consider some visitor information. And that coincided more or less with the arrival on the scene, if I can say that, of David and Mary Ellen, who came in, I think, at just the right moment to correct some of the information or the misinformation that I was giving the visitor information panels. And we're very grateful that they got involved, that they had the guts to get involved in the project, because it always takes an effort, I know, from personal experience. And so we were very glad that the Marriage in America decided that they would like to contribute towards creating a garden of remembrance at the site. So that is what we did in phase 2, if you like. So here we have some pictures showing paving going in, and that was after paving had been completed. Naming, very important. Naming, you can't really see it in the slide, but the two principals of the family were missing their names, so we reinstated those. And on the other side, we did a bit more able to actually allow people to appreciate the space, and significantly, we constructed a small structure on one side which would accommodate a bathroom for the guardian of the site and a small kitchen for the guardian, because it's essential to have these services in order to sustain places. And we also installed a CCTV system as well for the whole of the graveyard. And we linked the two sites together, which I think was a very critical part of the project, and which hopefully will lead to the development of the space between the two buildings in the future. This just shows the palm trees arriving on site. Sammy was very insistent that we should have palm trees and olive trees for symbolic reasons, so we have palm trees and olive trees. So here the palm trees arriving and showing them after they've been put into the ground, and this was more or less after the planting just got established. And then you saw today, those of you who visited, the garden has grown up, and I think that it's being very well maintained, and I think that it was a very fine project to be involved in, and I'm glad to have been a part of that, and it's thanks to the generosity of donors from the Carolina Jews of America that we were able to do this project at all. So what happens next? There has been discussion in the past about trying to utilize the central area for a future interpretation center, visitor center, something that will actually present the culture of the Karaite Jewish community of Cairo to a larger audience. I know that people do come and visit this site. It's possible to visit the site through appointment with the drop of milk. People can ring up and make appointments to come and visit it. And I think that this would be a very appropriate place to actually put a building that could have several functions, could be multivalent, I think is the word that people like to use these days. Multivalent space, but something that could tell the stories of those people who are no longer with us physically, and the community that is now part of the wider diaspora of the Jewish community of Egypt. So I'll end this talk here, because I know I'm really only the warm-up for David. So I will just end it with this picture, because I think it is such a rich image that it shows this community, this thriving community that is no longer in Egypt. And I think that we all have a duty to these people and a duty to their culture to actually make sure that their presence over thousands of years, more than 1,000 years in this country, well-integrated community, should be remembered by us in the future. So thank you very much.